welcome colleagues to this podcast. We're focusing on the National Funding Formula consultation. There are two phases to the consultation. One is live at the moment and will terminate at the end of September, and that's where we're going to focus our attention today. There is a second, more detailed consultation coming in the autumn. I'm delighted to be joined today by Robin Bevan, Dr. Robin Bevan. He is Chief Executive of Southend High School for Boys Academy Trust. He is patron of the Institute of School Business Leadership and was formerly the National President of NEU and has also been involved for well over a decade in the National Funding Formula debate. Welcome, Robin. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you for the introduction. Good to be working with you. Good to know the fabulous things you've been doing with ISPL, and good to be talking about the next steps evolution of the National Funding Formula. Hopefully the next version will be better than the current one.
Absolutely. So we're going to focus on a set of principles. There are 16 questions in the consultation document, but we're fairly confident that we can capture most of those questions using a series of principles. So I'm going to hand over to Robin, who'll talk us through those principles and how they link to the questions. Is that okay, Robin? Are we okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just worth saying how these principles have come about. We've been in conversation with a variety of practitioners, a variety of funding experts, and looked at how we were finding our answers emerging to those questions that the department have put forward. As we did that, we realized that, as you're saying, the questions kind of come in clusters, and those clusters have common answers. And so that's where we've got our principles from. For people trying to make sense of what are sometimes quite technical questions, it helps to do it the other way around, to hear the principles and then see how they apply to the questions. So yeah, I'll take you through them, Stephen, and by all means just interrupt if there's a lack of clarity in what I'm saying. But I'm going to give them lettered names so we don't get them confused with the question numbers in the survey. So the first principle, Principle A, and we think this is a view that's pretty widely held within the funding expert community, is that alignment of all elements of school funding to the National Funding Formula is a welcome and important development. And let me explain why, because if we are arguing for alignment with the National Funding Formula for all local authority schools, for all academies that are situated within those authorities, why would we be doing that, making that argument, when it seems to take away a certain amount of local democratic involvement in funding levels? And the answer is simply that for far too long, there have been significant discrepancies between the amount of funds going into neighbouring schools either side of authority boundary lines. Now, we do understand that authorities across the country will have different patterns of provision and different makeup, but still the underlying principle that it makes sense that resources distributed with common alignment to the principles of the NFF and the values, the funding values that are within the NFF, that's a good thing. And so we're arguing very strongly so that pupils, wherever they are in the country, if they're in the same set of circumstances, they will have the same level of resource. Just a footnote to that principle, that doesn't mean we're saying that there is currently enough money, and it doesn't mean that we're saying there's currently high enough values on some of those funding streams. What we are saying, though, is that that's the right mechanism to go forward. So that's kind of Principle A. Principle B follows from it fairly easily, fairly naturally. There are some questions in the consultation which are about the amount of time it should take, the transition from where we are now to full alignment with the National Funding Formula. And principle B is this, that period of transition should be as short as possible, because if there's something wrong with the current system and there's a better system, you want to get there as quickly as you can, okay, without turbulence, but you want to get there. So we've actually gone further and put a sense of what that time period ought to be. And our view is that full alignment with the national funding formula should occur within the lifetime of a pupil in a school, because if they're currently not being funded, not receiving the resource at the right level, they should get it while they're still there. Shouldn't be something that is a characteristic of their entire time in school. Also, for a head teacher or chief executive overseeing a single school or a family of schools, you want to know that within your time in office, in that post, you're going to have got to a level of fair funding for those institutions. So we are saying that it should happen within 5 years, preferably 3 years, but it's a 3 to 5 year window to get there.
Robin, just on that question, I think the consultation talks about 10%, and just so colleagues listening in can get a sense of what 10% would mean. I think we've done some calculations, and 10% takes you out as possibly as far as 10 years, and we think something more aggressive, more ambitious, perhaps in the region of 25% might get us to that 5 year target that you mentioned. Is that about right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's question 7, and let's just deal with that question. Do we agree that the formula factor value should move 10% closer to the NFF compared with how far they are out now? And our answer to that question would be no, because that takes too long. It takes too long to bring about that appropriate alignment and distribution of resource. So it's an odd question to say no to, because you kind of feel like, oh, well, let's do it, and let's be careful not to cause difficulty a little bit at a time. But as you say, if it's true that a pupil entering a all through primary enters that school with an inappropriate level of funding relative to a neighbouring school, and then by the time they leave year 6, it's still not got to the right level of funding, there's something wrong. So question 7, the answer is no.
Yeah. Thanks, Robin.
Yeah, I'm going to go in a slightly different direction for principle C. This is slightly technical, but it's not that complicated. At the moment, we've got a mixture of different funding years for different types of school. And most people listening to this will know that local authorities local authority maintained schools have a funding year that's April to April, and an accounting year that's April to April. Academies have the September, August funding year and accounting year. And then we've got oddments wrapped around that, like pupil premium. So I lead an academy. Our funding year is September, August. It's aligned with the academic year, but we're forever having to get our pupil premium and split it into 5/12 and 7/12 and carry it forward across the accounting year. And so here's principle C, that for all schools, whether they are local authority maintained or whether they are academies, free schools, for all schools, the funding year should align with the academic year, because that's the year when you've got that pupil cohort, and therefore it should depend upon the characteristics of the October census, bringing in, if the October census data is significantly adrift from prediction, bringing in suitable top-up in year, but by and large, working as we do now, which is October census looking backwards to adjust. And we don't think there should be any oddities at all. So whether it's a supplementary teacher pay grant at some point, or whether it's a sports premium or a pupil premium or a catch-up grant, all of them should be aligned on the basis of that funding year being the same as the academic year, being the same as the October census data determination. So that was principle C. There's 2 more, both of which are relatively simple. The first is principle D, which is that, in our view, there shouldn't be any distinction between access to funding and a relative benefit in that between local authority maintained schools and academies. So you're looking to align those two systems. And that, for example, picks up on question 4. And I will just deal with that one because it's the only one that's really of that kind. There's something a little bit odd about the proposals in the consultation around question 4, because it essentially suggests that additional growth funding and support funding for falling roles would be prioritised towards academies. And that's a very, very odd, even if you happen to be a supporter of the academy system, it's a very odd, slightly punitive recommendation. So there is a clear response on number 4, at least we think there is, which is that it matters that maintained schools are equally eligible for the growth and falling roles funding as academies are. So that's principle D. And then we've got one last principle, and probably worth just picking up which questions this applies to. So this is principle E. And in the consultation, there are 4 questions that kind of stand out as a little bit odd. They don't seem to fit in with the others. Okay, so these are questions 2, 11, 12, and ultimately 16, which is the any further comments question. And what's distinctive about questions 2, 11, and 12 is that they all involve costs that are beyond what you would reasonably expect to fall into an annual accounting obligation of an institution or a MAT. So I'll just give you some examples. Significant capital costs, significant central services, and sometimes people a bit dismissive about local authority central services. Over the years, there's been a shift away from many of them, particularly for school improvement. But the reality is that local authority central services, particularly in areas associated with issues that are borderline with health, issues that are borderline with significant social services intervention, issues relating to things like crime, young offenders, drug abuse, and drug prevention, all of those need to continue to have significant funding at local authority central service level. Unusual termination of employment costs, so we've got a significant set of redundancies or restructuring. And the other peculiar one there is issues like the LGPS, the local government pension scheme deficits. And if we take all of those, they all fall kind of outside really the control of even the most skilled governance and leadership. And so we would argue that there needs to be, alongside the NFF, so this is principle E, alongside the NFF, there needs to be a good, well thought through, integrated strategy around additional capital funding. Who can get it? Everybody. When? According to need, and then with a process. Good understanding that you can't just wipe out central services from local authorities, that even where academies are strong and chains are strong, that they are still dependent upon the integration into local services and need those services. And on the other 2 examples I mentioned as well, significant termination costs, which is around question E. There's also borrowing costs in question E. Same principle. We want a distinctive strategy on those elements. So those are the 5 principles. I'll just, if I may, Stephen, just
Sure.
Quick synopsis. Principle A, align to the NFF as straightforwardly, uniformly as we can. Principle B, make that alignment within a 3 to 5 year window. Principle C, bring all funding to align with the academic year in all schools with no exceptions to funding streams at all. Principle D, make sure that whatever you're doing is aligned equitably between local authority maintained schools and academies. And finally, that strategy, principle E, around significant additional costs that would be outside what you would normally expect in the provision of education. So I hope that's helpful.
Very helpful, Robin. Thank you very much. Very helpful and incredibly clear. And I think you're right, particularly on principle E, to point out the creeping expectations that there have been on schools to manage health and welfare. And if we don't get that right, there's going to be a continued burden, unfunded burden on schools. So really important that we don't lose sight of that. And I agree absolutely that capital.
Unfunded and realistically beyond the expertise of an individual institution. And schools can do really good mental health support, counselling support, and elements that just begin towards the social services. But what they can't do is deal with the needs of a community and the young people who are in need of services beyond the limits of what a school can intelligently and appropriately apply.
Agreed. I'm going to take the opportunity, if I may, Robin, just to go beyond the consultation, because I think it's important that colleagues understand what this consultation is about, and that we recognise that there is a debate to be had around the quantum. This is about distribution, so it's important that we understand what the aims of this consultation are. But I also want to reassure colleagues that we're fighting the good fight for an improved investment in the investment in education as well. So just something on decoupling those two conversations.
Yeah, I think it's that's an important spotlight to shine at this point. So we know that there are schools that have seen across the last 10-year period an equivalent of a 20% reduction, real terms, in their income. It's been really significant in the post-16 environment, but also significant for some primaries and some secondary schools. When we're talking about how to distribute the funding, the principles that I've just run through are absolutely clear, defensible, but none of them are saying that we step back from also talking about whether there is enough funding in the first place. And one of the issues that Stephen, you and I have talked about a lot, and we've talked repeatedly with senior civil servants on this issue, is about the funding level for the per pupil minimum. People tend to think that that's an issue that only matters for schools at the lower end of the funding envelope, but it is actually part of the component calculation for every single school and academy. And what's really important on that element of funding is that we move to a position where the per pupil minimum is calculated on what it actually needs to be given to a school to fund and provide for a pupil with good home circumstances and without, if you like, some of the challenges around deprivation or the additional challenges of language or special educational needs. And what we want to see is a system where the per pupil minimum is something that schools could actually operate on, rather than having to have a per pupil minimum and a minimum funding guarantee and then finding that in many schools they're actually using their pupil premium income and their deprivation income to run their core curriculum. So we know that there is an issue around that, and we'll be shouting loud and clear about it. This consultation, as you say, Stephen, is on some technical elements. So you want to make sure that your channels are right for the funding, and then you want to make sure the channels are full of the funding.
Very, very helpful, Robin. At the end of this podcast, what you'll see come up is the 5 principles, and those 5 principles mapped to the consultation questions. Additionally, as the podcast draws to an end, there'll be a link to that document on our website. So thank you, Robin, for taking us through step by step through those principles. I think that will be really helpful for colleagues as they contemplate how they're going to respond to the consultation. And just finally, I just want to give mention to 3 fellows of the Institute that have helped our thinking, Simon Oxenham, Mike White and Stephen Lester. Robin, thanks very much for your time again, and we look forward to hearing from people and hope you can submit a response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And I'm just going to use a little moment, if it gets edited in, to advertise the fact that I think we're in conversation at the Academy Show later on in the autumn. And alongside us, I think we'll have Tom Goldman, who is the senior civil servant working on the national funding formula. And if people watching this are able to attend the Academy Show and do want to come to that session, it would be really good for you to arrive with those 5 principles we've just been talking about clear in your heads and drop them into your questions. So if you can make that, that would be great. Stephen, thank you very much indeed, and we will speak soon.
Brilliant. Thank you.